Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you heartfelt tales of love, resilience, and the unexpected moments that shape our lives. Today's story is about a chance encounter that unravels a long-buried past, a little girl's innocent curiosity, and the profound journey of reconnecting with family and finding hope amidst the storms of life. It's a story that will tug at your heartstrings and remind you of the importance of forgiveness, empathy, and second chances. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories and join us as we begin today's touching tale. Let's dive in. The air inside the Ritz-Carlton's Grand Ballroom was alive with chatter, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. Light from the glittering chandeliers reflected off the polished marble floors, casting a warm, golden glow over the crowd. It was one of those evenings that demanded nothing less than perfection, from the way the attendees were dressed to the practiced ease of their smiles. For most people here, this was a celebration of New York City's elite, a showcase of wealth and glamour. For me, it was another night to endure. I stood near the edge of the room, away from the bustling groups and their animated conversations. My tailored suit, perfectly cut to fit the contours of my frame, felt more like a costume than clothing. I wasn't uncomfortable, far from it. I was used to this. The endless galas, the lavish fundraisers, and the small talk were all part of the life I had built. But lately, these events had begun to feel hollow, as though I was playing a role in a movie I no longer wanted to be part of. The crowd's laughter blended into the background, muted and distant. My mind wandered to the warmth of my library at home, the quiet solitude of a book waiting for me on the mahogany table. That was where I truly belonged. As I sipped from my glass of Bordeaux, my gaze wandered across the room. For a brief moment, I thought I saw her, a woman with dark hair and striking features, someone whose memory I had carefully locked away for years. But it wasn't her. It couldn't be. Still, the resemblance was enough to pull me from my reverie. I turned my attention to the far corner of the ballroom, where a young girl was tugging insistently at her mother's hand. She was small, her curls bouncing with every excited movement. Her dress, though modest, had been carefully chosen, and it was clear she didn't belong to this world of wealth and excess. Her mother, on the other hand, looked like she was trying her best to blend in. She wore a long, flowing gown that seemed slightly out of place amidst the sea of designer outfits, and there was a nervousness in her posture. Yet despite the contrast, the little girl's energy lit up the corner of the room. I couldn't help but smile. "Mom, look, that's him," the girl's voice rang out, clear and unfiltered by the social restraints most people here adhered to. Her small finger pointed directly at me. I froze, the smile fading from my face. The mother turned, her cheeks flushing as her eyes met mine. She hesitated, caught between her daughter's enthusiasm and the instinct to retreat. Something about her felt familiar. I couldn't quite place it, but a strange sensation gripped me, like the distant echo of a forgotten melody. Before I could react, the little girl darted forward, pulling her mother along with her. Her determined steps cut through the crowd, and within seconds, they were standing in front of me, up close. The resemblance was undeniable. It hit me like a punch to the gut. "Excuse me, sir," the girl chirped, her bright eyes looking up at me with unfiltered curiosity. "My mom has a picture of you." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I stared at her, unable to respond. "A picture of me?" My gaze flicked to the woman beside her, the mother, whose expression was a mix of embarrassment and quiet resolve. She looked away, as though bracing herself for whatever would come next. I began, but my voice faltered. The girl's words had thrown me off balance, and I could feel the room closing in. The chandeliers seemed too bright, the air too thick. The mother stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Lily, sweetheart, I think we should." "No, Mom, I want to talk to him," the girl interrupted, her small hands clasped together in front of her as though she were pleading with her mother. Then she turned back to me, her eyes wide with excitement. It's from a long time ago. She says you were really nice and helped her a lot. My heart pounded in my chest. The girl's innocence was disarming. Her words cutting through the carefully constructed walls I had spent years building. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't know what to say. Is that so? I finally managed. My voice barely above a whisper. I knelt down slightly, bringing myself to her level. And what did your mom tell you about me? She said you were very kind and that you did something really important for her. But she didn't tell me what. Lily tilted her head, her curls framing her face as she studied me intently. Why didn't she tell me? The question wasn't meant for me, but it felt like an arrow to the chest nonetheless. My gaze shifted to the mother, searching for answers in her downcast eyes. She had been quiet, letting her daughter do all the talking. But now, she straightened her posture and met my gaze. Lily, she said softly, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Why don't you go see if they have any cupcakes? I'll join you in a moment. The girl frowned, clearly reluctant to leave. But after a moment of hesitation, she nodded. Okay. But you have to promise to come with me soon. I promise, the mother replied, giving her daughter a reassuring smile. Once Lily skipped off toward the dessert table, the woman turned her full attention to me. You probably don't remember me, she began, her voice quieter now, almost hesitant. It's been a long time. I studied her face, searching the features for a memory that still felt just out of reach. And then, like a floodgate opening, it all came rushing back. Grace. Her name was Grace. How could I have forgotten? She had been the bright light in a much darker time of my life. Someone who had believed in me when I had barely believed in myself. Grace. I said, the name tasting foreign and familiar all at once. It really has been a long time. She smiled. But it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't expect to see you here. I could say the same. I replied, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions her presence stirred within me. You're an artist now? She nodded. It's not much, but I've managed to make a living from it. And Lily? I asked. Though the question felt unnecessary, the answer was written all over her face. She's my daughter, Grace said simply, her voice steady. But there was something in her tone, a note of defensiveness. Perhaps even guilt. 1,000 questions swirled in my mind, but I couldn't voice any of them. Not yet. Instead, I asked the one that seemed the most pressing. Why did she say you have a picture of me? Grace hesitated, her eyes flickering toward Lily in the distance. It's complicated, she said finally. But maybe it's time we talked about it. As I looked at her, I felt the weight of the past settle heavily on my shoulders. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a collision of worlds. A meeting that had been written in the stars long before either of us had stepped foot in this ballroom. And though I didn't yet understand the full scope of what it meant, one thing was clear, my life was about to change forever. The night outside the Ritz-Carlton felt quieter than it should have been. The New York City skyline glowing faintly in the distance, softened by a slight evening mist. The hum of traffic, faint and muted, served as a backdrop to the heavy silence that hung between Grace and me. We had stepped out of the grand ballroom, leaving the noise and glamour behind, seeking a moment of clarity amidst the chaos this unexpected meeting had stirred. I had walked through countless nights like this before, nights when the weight of my accomplishments felt as hollow as the city streets at dawn. But this was different. This time, the past was staring me in the face, embodied in a woman I hadn't thought I'd see again and a little girl with curls and bright eyes who, against all reason, looked far too familiar. A girl who said her mother had a picture of me. Richard. Grace began, her voice hesitant, almost breaking the silence as though she feared what might happen if she did. There are things I need to explain, but I don't even know where to start. I glanced at her, taking in the way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the delicate strap of her evening bag. Her gaze darted toward the doors we had just exited, where inside her daughter was likely still enjoying the cupcakes from the dessert table. The image of Lily's face floated back to me. Her innocent joy. The way she had declared her connection to me with the kind of trust only a child could possess. "How about the picture?" I asked softly, my voice carefully measured. "What picture is she talking about?" Grace winced, a flicker of guilt flashing across her face. "It's a photo from a long time ago," she admitted. "From when we knew each other." "Knew each other," I repeated, the words feeling far too casual for what we had shared. Grace wasn't just some acquaintance from my past. At one time, she had been my everything. My first love. The only woman who had ever truly made me question whether I could build a life centered on someone else, rather than the empire I had so relentlessly pursued. But I had chosen the empire. I had walked away from the nights spent dreaming about a future that felt more about her and less about me. At the time, I had convinced myself it was the right choice. That the love we shared, as profound and consuming as it had been, could not survive the weight of my ambitions. I had thought I was protecting her by letting her go. "Why do you still have it?" I asked, my words sharper than I had intended. There was a part of me that didn't want to hear her answer, but an even larger part of me needed to. Grace drew a shaky breath, her gaze fixing on the pavement as though the cracks in the concrete might hold the answers she was searching for. "Because I couldn't let go of everything," she said quietly. "Even when I wanted to. Even when I thought it would be easier if I just forgot." I felt something tighten in my chest. An ache I hadn't expected. She hadn't let go. And neither, I realized, had I. Grace's face. The sound of her laughter. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about her art, those memories had always been there, buried deep beneath the layers of my carefully constructed life. "And Lily?" I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "What about her? Why didn't you ever tell me?" Grace's head snapped up, her eyes wide with something that looked like both fear and defiance. "Because I didn't know how. Richard. I didn't know if I should." Her words tumbled out quickly, as though she had been holding them back for years. "I didn't want to disrupt your life. You had already made your choice. You left. And she faltered, her shoulders slumping under the weight of the confession. "I didn't want to drag you back into something you didn't want." I stared at her, the words hitting me harder than I thought they would. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. I had walked away from her, believing I was doing the right thing. But now, standing here under the faint glow of the city lights, it felt like every choice I had made back then was coming back to haunt me. "And what about Lily?" I asked again, more firmly this time. "You made that decision for me, Grace. You didn't even give me the chance to decide if I wanted to be part of her life." "I was trying to protect her," she shot back, her voice rising slightly. "From what?" "From me," I demanded, the frustration boiling over. "From the man who might have wanted to be there for her, who might have wanted to." My voice broke, the anger giving way to something deeper, something rawer. "Who might have wanted to be her father." Grace flinched, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was deafening, filled with all the words that had been left unspoken over the years. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as I tried to collect myself. The truth was, I didn't know how I would have reacted if she had told me back then. But I hated that she had taken the choice away from me. When I finally looked back at her, Grace was watching me, her expression softened by regret. "She doesn't know," she said quietly. "She doesn't know who you are. To her, you're just a man in a photo. Someone I told her was kind once." Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. For 8 years, Lily had lived her life without knowing me, without knowing that I existed. And now, by some twist of fate, here we were, standing on the edge of a truth that could change everything. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "What happens next?" Grace hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the ballroom doors again. I don't know, she admitted. I never planned for this. Richard. I never thought we'd, she broke off, shaking her head as though she couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. I took a deep breath, trying to find the words that would make sense of all this. We owe it to her, I said finally. To Lily. To figure this out. Grace nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. I need time. Time. I repeated, as though the word itself could somehow change the fact that 8 years had already passed. Okay. But we can't avoid this forever. Grace. We have to face it. She didn't respond, but the look in her eyes said she knew I was right. As the evening stretched on, the weight of what lay ahead settled heavily between us. Whatever the future held, it was clear that none of our lives would ever be the same again. The following morning, I woke up with an uneasy feeling settling in my chest. The memories of my conversation with Grace outside the Ritz-Carlton lingered, intertwining with the vivid image of Lily's bright, curious eyes. I couldn't shake the weight of her words, how she had tried to protect her daughter by keeping me in the dark, how she had feared disrupting my life. But now my life felt disrupted in a way I could never have anticipated. And there was no turning back. I stared out of my bedroom window at the Manhattan skyline, its tall, gleaming buildings shrouded in a light morning fog. For years, I had found comfort in this view, the city's heartbeat mirroring my own drive and ambition. But today, it felt different. Hollow. The sharp edges of those buildings reminded me of all I had sacrificed to reach this point, including the love I had walked away from and, perhaps, the family I hadn't known I had. I couldn't sit still. The questions racing through my mind demanded answers. And I wasn't the type to let things remain unresolved. My schedule for the day was packed with meetings. But I cancelled them all. The polished, disciplined businessman in me would have frowned at the sudden irresponsibility. But for once, I didn't care. This was more important than quarterly reports or shareholder updates. By mid-morning, I found myself standing outside a small art gallery in Brooklyn. I knew Grace's work had been displayed here for years. She had always loved this part of the city, finding inspiration in its eclectic streets and vibrant culture. The gallery itself was understated, tucked between a vintage bookstore and a cafe, but it exuded a quiet charm that felt unmistakably hers. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of oil paints and varnish filled the air. The space was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of visitors admiring the art. Grace's touch was everywhere, in the carefully arranged displays, in the bursts of color that seemed to leap off the canvases. Her talent was undeniable, and as I wandered through the gallery, I found myself drawn to one piece in particular. It was a painting of a sunset over a turbulent sea. The brushstrokes were bold and sweeping, the colors vivid yet haunting. The figure of a lone woman stood on the edge of a cliff, gazing out at the horizon. There was a sense of longing in the image, an unspoken story that resonated deeply within me. It was Grace, I realized. She had poured herself into this painting, capturing the emotions she had likely carried for years. Beautiful, isn't it? A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a gallery employee, a young woman with short hair and a warm smile, standing nearby. Yes, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. It's extraordinary. It's one of Grace Collins's signature pieces, she continued, her tone filled with admiration. She's an incredible artist. Her work has this way of connecting with people, of making them feel something. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Does she come here often? I asked, trying to sound casual. The woman hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied me. She stops by occasionally to check on her pieces. Are you a collector? Or just a fan of her work? Something like that, I replied, avoiding the question. Do you know where I might find her? The woman hesitated again before offering a small shrug. She has a studio not far from here. Sometimes she works there during the day. You might catch her." I thanked her and left the gallery, my heart pounding as I made my way to the address she had given me. The studio was tucked away on a quiet street, its entrance marked by a small wooden sign that simply read Collins Studio. I stood outside for a moment, debating whether to knock or leave, before finally summoning the courage to push open the door. Inside, the studio was a haven of creativity. Canvases leaned against the walls, some finished, others still in progress. The air was filled with the faint smell of turpentine and fresh paint. And there, standing at an easel with her back to me, was Grace. She didn't notice me at first, her focus entirely on the canvas in front of her. She moved with a quiet intensity, her brush gliding across the surface with practiced precision. Watching her like this, I was reminded of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago, the woman who had once dreamed of a life where her art could speak to the world. I cleared my throat, and she froze, her brush hovering mid-air. Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes widening in surprise. "Richard," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grace," I replied, stepping closer. "I needed to see you." Her expression shifted, a mixture of surprise and apprehension crossing her face. "Why?" she asked, setting the brush down on the easel. "What more is there to say?" "I can't stop thinking about her," I admitted, my voice raw. "About Lily. About what you told me." Grace sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I told you. I didn't plan for any of this. I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping her life simple. By protecting her." "Protecting her from what?" I asked, frustration seeping into my tone. "From me. From the possibility of having a father who cares about her." "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "You walked away, Richard. You chose your career, your ambitions. I didn't think you'd want to come back." I stared at her, the words hitting me like a blow. "You never gave me the chance to decide," I said quietly. "And now I'm here. Grace. I want to be part of her life." Grace looked away, her shoulders tense. "It's not that simple." "Maybe it's not," I agreed, stepping closer. "But we owe it to her to try. She deserves to know the truth." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging between us. For a moment, Grace seemed on the verge of saying something, but then she shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She's my whole world, Richard," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want to do what's best for her." "So do I replied, my voice steady. "And I think the best thing for her is for us to face this together." Grace didn't respond, but the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes told me she was listening. This wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined to be there for Lily, for Grace, and for the future I had never thought possible. Grace remained silent after my words, her gaze drifting back to the canvas behind her. I could sense the storm of emotions brewing inside her, the conflict between her instinct to protect Lily and the undeniable pull of the truth. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the easel, and for a moment, I thought she might shut me out completely. But then she spoke, her voice low and heavy with emotion. "Richard, I need you to understand something. Raising Lily hasn't been easy. I've tried to shield her from the kind of pain I experienced, pain I didn't want her to feel. She's only 8 years old. She's still so innocent. And the thought of introducing uncertainty into her life terrifies me." Her words cut deep. I had spent years in control of everything, my career, my decisions, my world. But this was a world I hadn't been a part of, one I hadn't realized I'd left behind. I stepped closer, trying to find the right words to bridge the gap between us. "She's stronger than you think," I said gently. "And so are you, Grace. I'm not here to take anything away from you. You've done an incredible job raising her. I see that. But I think Lily deserves the chance to know who I am, to know where she comes from." Grace turned to face me fully, her expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. And what if it all goes wrong? What if she resents me for keeping you away? Or worse, what if she gets hurt because I let you into her life? I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the moment. I can't promise I'll be perfect, I admitted. But I can promise I'll try. I want to be here for her. Grace. For both of you. I've spent so many years chasing success, thinking it would fill the emptiness inside me. But now I realize what I was missing all along. Her eyes softened, though I could still see the hesitation in them. What were you missing? She asked quietly. Family, I replied, my voice steady. Connection. A sense of purpose beyond boardrooms and bank accounts. When I saw Lily at the gala, something shifted in me. And when you told me the truth, it made me realize that all the wealth and power in the world mean nothing if I don't have the people I care about by my side. Grace's expression faltered, and I could see the tears she had been holding back start to well in her eyes. She blinked quickly, trying to compose herself. But her voice cracked when she finally spoke. Do you know how many nights I spent wondering if I made the right choice? Wondering if I'd ruined everything by not telling you? Her vulnerability struck me like a blow. And I stepped closer, reaching out but stopping short of touching her. You made the best choice you could at the time, I said softly. But we're here now. We can make new choices. Together. Grace's shoulders slumped, as though the weight of the years she had carried alone was finally catching up to her. I don't know how to let you in, she admitted. I've built a life for Lily and me, and I'm scared of what might happen if it changes. I nodded, understanding the fear in her voice. I'm not asking you to give up the life you've built, I assured her. I just want to be a part of it. Slowly. On your terms. I'll prove to you that I'm here for the right reasons. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. But it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that comes when two people finally begin to lay down their defenses. When walls start to crumble and the possibility of trust begins to emerge. Just then, the sound of a door opening broke the stillness. Both of us turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, her curls framing her face like a halo. She was holding a paintbrush in one hand, her cheeks smudged with a faint streak of green paint. She looked at us curiously, her bright eyes darting between me and Grace. Mommy, she asked, her voice hesitant. Are you okay? Grace immediately softened, her maternal instincts taking over. I'm fine. Sweetheart, she said, walking over to her daughter and crouching down to her level. What are you doing with that paintbrush? Lily grinned sheepishly. I was trying to paint like you. But it's really hard. Grace chuckled softly, brushing a stray curl away from Lily's face. It takes practice, my love. But I bet your painting is beautiful. Lily's gaze shifted to me, her head tilting slightly. You're the man from the gala, she said matter-of-factly, her tone curious rather than accusatory. I smiled, crouching down to meet her eyes. That's right. My name is Richard. Lily studied me for a moment before glancing at Grace. Is he your friend? Mommy? Grace hesitated, her gaze flickering to mine before she answered. Yes. He's a friend. Lily seemed satisfied with that answer, her small shoulders relaxing as she gave me a shy smile. You look like the man in the picture, she said innocently, her words striking both Grace and me like lightning. Grace froze, her eyes widening as she looked at me. I could see the panic rising in her, the fear that the truth was about to spill out before she was ready. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, silently telling her that we would navigate this together. Lily, I said gently, turning my attention back to her. Can I ask you something? She nodded, her curls bouncing with the movement. Do you like painting? I asked, keeping my tone light and conversational. Her face lit up with enthusiasm. I love it. Mommy says I'm really good at it. I smiled, feeling a surge of warmth at her innocence and joy. Well, if you love it and you practice, I think you'll be an amazing artist one day. Just like your mom. Lily beamed. her pride evident in her wide smile. "Do you like painting too?" I chuckled softly. "I'm not very good at it. But I think it's beautiful. Especially your mom's paintings." Grace watched the exchange with a mixture of emotion and uncertainty. I could see the conflict in her eyes. The struggle between her desire to protect Lily and the realization that our connection was already beginning to form. Lily looked at me thoughtfully before speaking again. "You can come see my painting if you want." Her invitation took me by surprise. But I nodded, touched by her openness. "I'd love to." As Lily led me toward her small workspace in the corner of the studio, Grace followed behind us, her expression unreadable. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and complicated journey. But in that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to become the family we were always meant to be. Lily's little fingers wrapped around mine as she pulled me toward her makeshift art corner in the studio. My heart swelled with every small step she took. It wasn't just her infectious energy or her bright smile, it was the realization that, for the first time in my life, I was walking into something real. Something unpolished but profoundly beautiful. Lily was pure, untainted by the complexities of adulthood. And somehow, she was offering me an unearned place in her little world. It was humbling. "Here it is," she exclaimed, letting go of my hand and darting forward. She proudly pointed at her painting propped up on a low table. The canvas was filled with streaks of bold, bright colors, greens, blues, and splashes of yellow. It wasn't perfect by any technical measure, but there was something magical about it. It was filled with the kind of fearless creativity only a child could have. "It's beautiful," I said earnestly, kneeling down to get a better look. "What is it?" Lily tilted her head, as though deciding whether to share the secret behind her masterpiece. "It's the sun," she said finally, her tone matter-of-fact. "But not the normal sun. This one is special. It's bigger and brighter because it's a happy sun." Grace stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. I glanced at her briefly, noting the way her eyes softened as she watched her daughter. I could see the pride on her face. And beneath that, the worry she was trying so hard to hide. This wasn't just about a painting or a conversation. This was about Lily's world, her safety, her future, and I knew Grace was measuring every step I took, every word I said, against the potential impact it might have on her little girl. "A happy sun," I repeated, nodding thoughtfully. "I can see that. You've done an amazing job making it look happy." Lily's face lit up at the compliment. "Do you really think so?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of excitement and doubt. "I do," I replied. "It's full of energy and color. It makes me feel happy just looking at it." Lily grinned. And for a moment, the tension in the room seemed to lift. Grace uncrossed her arms and stepped closer, her gaze flickering between me and her daughter. "You worked hard on that one, didn't you, Lily?" Grace said, her voice warm but still carrying a hint of hesitation. "I did," Lily chirped. "It took me 3 whole days. Mommy helped me with the brushes because I got paint everywhere." I chuckled at the mental image. That's part of the fun, though, isn't it? Getting messy. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "It's the best part. Mommy says it's okay as long as I clean up after." Grace's lips curved into a small smile, but she didn't say anything. I could tell she was still grappling with the moment, trying to figure out where this was all heading and how much she was willing to let me in. "Lily," I said gently, "do you think I could paint something with you someday?" Her eyes widened in surprise. "You want to paint with me?" "I'd love to," I said. "If it's okay with you and your mom." Lily turned to Grace, her excitement bubbling over. "Mommy, can he? Please. It would be so fun." Grace hesitated, her gaze locking onto mine. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but also something else, something that looked a lot like hope. "We'll see," she said finally, her tone careful but not dismissive. Lily didn't seem to notice the weight behind her mother's words. She clapped her hands together and bounced on her toes, already planning the colors we would use and the pictures we could paint. As I watched her, I felt an ache deep in my chest, a mix of joy and regret. I had missed so much. 8 years of birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and moments like this. And yet, standing here now, I felt like I had been given a second chance. It wasn't something I deserved, but it was something I was determined to earn. Lily, Grace said after a moment, her tone shifting slightly. Why don't you wash up? It's almost time for dinner. Okay, Lily chirped, darting out of the room without a second thought. Her footsteps echoed down the hall, and then the sound of running water filled the space. Grace and I were alone again, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. She stood by the table, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of Lily's painting. She's so open, she said quietly, her voice carrying a mix of pride and fear. She doesn't know how complicated life can be, and I want to keep it that way for as long as I can. I understand, I said, stepping closer, and I don't want to disrupt that. But Grace, I can't ignore the fact that she's my daughter. I want to be a part of her life. I want to know her. Grace let out a shaky breath, her hand falling to her side. Richard, this isn't just about you or me. This is about Lily. And she's my whole world. I can't risk her getting hurt. I know, I said, my voice steady. And I promise, I'll do everything I can to prove to you that I'm not here to hurt her or you. I just want to be here. To help. To support. I paused, searching for the right words. To be the father she deserves. Grace looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded, though her eyes were still filled with uncertainty. We'll take it one step at a time, she said. No promises. No expectations. Just one step at a time. Relief washed over me, though I knew this was only the beginning. That's all I'm asking for, I said. Before Grace could respond, Lily came bounding back into the room, her face freshly washed and her excitement renewed. Mommy, what's for dinner? She asked, her eyes darting between us. Grace smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. How about spaghetti? It's your favorite. Lily's eyes lit up, and she turned to me. Do you like spaghetti? I chuckled, nodding. I love it. Good. Then you can eat with us, she declared, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Grace shot me a look, part warning, part resigned amusement, and I held up my hands in surrender. Only if your mom says it's okay, I said carefully. Grace hesitated for a moment before sighing. Fine. But only if you promise to help clean up. Deal. I said with a grin, as Lily led the way to the kitchen, chattering happily about the sauce and the noodles. I felt something shift inside me. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. A fragile, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something new. The kitchen was a cozy, lived-in space that immediately felt like the heart of their home. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and shelves were lined with mismatched plates and jars filled with spices. A vase of fresh daisies sat on the counter, their cheerful petals adding a touch of warmth to the room. Lily darted ahead, already rummaging through a drawer for her favorite red apron. Here, Mommy, she said, handing Grace an apron too. We have to wear these, or we'll get sauce everywhere. Grace chuckled as she tied the apron around her waist. You're right, sweetheart. And we can't have spaghetti without a little mess. Can we? Lily turned to me next, holding out an apron that had been clearly designed for someone much smaller. Here. You can wear this one. I couldn't help but laugh at the sight of it, the apron barely reaching halfway down my chest. Are you sure this will fit me? Lily giggled. It's okay. You just have to be careful. Grace smirked as she watched me awkwardly tie the apron strings behind my back. Well, Richard, you said you'd help clean up. Better get used to the chaos. I'm ready, I replied with a grin, though I wasn't sure if I was referring to the cooking or the whirlwind of emotions that came with stepping into their lives. We fell into an easy rhythm as we prepared the meal. Grace chopped vegetables with practiced precision, while Lily and I tackled the task of boiling water for the pasta. Lily was a bundle of energy, her chatter filling the room as she recounted stories from school and the adventures she had with her friends. It was impossible not to smile at her enthusiasm, her words tumbling out in a stream of pure joy. And then, at recess, Sarah said she could climb the tallest tree, but she got stuck, and we had to get Mr. Jenkins to help her down, Lily exclaimed, her hands waving animatedly as she spoke. That sounds exciting, I said, nodding along. Were you brave enough to climb it too? Lily shook her head, her curls bouncing. No way. I told Sarah it was a bad idea, but she didn't listen. Mommy says you should always think before you do something. Grace glanced up from her cutting board, her eyes softening as she met my gaze. She's a good listener, she said quietly, almost as if she were reminding herself. She's amazing, I replied, my voice low but sincere. And she was. Every little thing about Lily, from her curiosity to her bright laughter, felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. As the sauce simmered on the stove and the pasta cooked, the three of us moved around the kitchen like we had been doing this forever. It was such a simple, ordinary moment, and yet it felt monumental to me. I had spent years surrounded by wealth and luxury, but nothing compared to the warmth of this tiny kitchen and the connection I felt with Grace and Lily. When it was time to set the table, Lily took charge, carefully arranging the plates and utensils with the seriousness of someone preparing for a grand banquet. This fork is for the spaghetti, and this one is for the salad, she explained, her small hands adjusting each piece until it was just right. You're very organized, I said, helping her place the glasses. She gets it from me, Grace said with a playful smile, her tone lighter than it had been all evening. I chuckled. I can see that. You've taught her well. Once everything was ready, we sat down together, the warm glow of the kitchen lights making the moment feel even more intimate. Lily insisted on saying grace, her voice earnest as she thanked the universe for the food, her mom, and, for the first time, our new friend, Richard. Grace's eyes flickered to mine as Lily spoke, and I saw the emotion there, the quiet battle she was fighting within herself. She was opening a door, but she was also scared of what might happen if she let me step through. The spaghetti was delicious, the kind of comforting meal that made you feel like you belonged. Lily chattered happily between bites, occasionally smearing sauce on her cheek or dropping noodles onto the table. Grace and I shared a few quiet laughs as we cleaned up her messes, the small moments of connection building a fragile bridge between us. After dinner, Lily insisted on showing me her favorite bedtime story. She tugged my hand and led me to her room, which was a colorful explosion of books, toys, and drawings taped to the walls. She grabbed a well-worn book with a bright cover and plopped onto her bed, patting the space beside her. Can you read it to me? She asked, her eyes wide with hope. Grace stood in the doorway, her arms crossed but her expression soft. It's okay if you don't want to, she said, though there was no challenge in her voice, only an understanding of how overwhelming all of this might be. But I didn't hesitate. Of course, I said, sitting down beside Lily and opening the book. Her little head rested against my arm as I began to read, my voice steady but my heart pounding. The story was a simple one about a brave rabbit on an adventure. But for me, it felt like so much more. It was a moment of connection, a tiny piece of the puzzle I was trying to fit together. By the time I finished the story, Lily's eyelids were drooping, and her head had slumped against my shoulder. I glanced at Grace, who gave me a small nod, stepping forward to lift Lily into bed and tuck her in. Good night, sweetheart, Grace whispered, brushing a kiss against her daughter's forehead. "Good night, Mommy." "Good night, Richard," Lily mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Good night, Lily," I said softly, my chest tightening at the sound of her saying my name. Grace and I left the room, closing the door quietly behind us. The hallway was dimly lit, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of the day hung between us, heavy but not unbearable. "She adores you already," Grace said finally, her voice a mix of wonder and caution. "But this is just the beginning. Richard, you can't rush this." "I know," I replied, meeting her gaze. "I don't expect it to be easy. But I'm not going anywhere. Grace, I want to be here for her. And for you." Grace looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine. Then she nodded. A small but significant gesture. "We'll see," she said quietly, echoing the words she had spoken earlier. "One step at a time." And as I walked out of their home that night, my heart felt both heavy and light, a strange, bittersweet mixture of hope and uncertainty. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving toward something that mattered, something real. As the sun set on the quiet suburban street, Richard stood outside Grace and Lily's home, his heart full of emotions he could barely name. The journey had been anything but simple, unearthing buried truths, rebuilding fragile bonds, and finding hope in places he never thought to look. He knew this was only the beginning, but for the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Grace had opened her heart just a little, and Lily's innocent smile had given him the courage to dream of a future he thought was lost. Life is never perfect, and the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But the love of a little girl and the resilience of a woman who had weathered her own storms showed Richard that life's most profound lessons often come from unexpected places. Sometimes, it's not about fixing the past but about building something new from its pieces. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories. Stay tuned for more tales of love, resilience, and the unexpected connections that shape our lives. Because everyone has a story, and every story has the power to inspire. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.